One moment of holiday cheer, one fatal mistake. That's all it took to turn Christmas celebrations into the 6 most shocking holiday tragedies ever documented. These aren't just freak accidents. They're reminders that the most wonderful time of the year can become deadly when festive spirit overrides basic safety. It was December 25th, 2013, in a modest 2-story colonial home on Maple Street in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Snow covered the sidewalks outside, and the house smelled of coffee and baked cinnamon rolls. Inside, a casual Christmas morning between 2 brothers drifted toward a needless risk that emergency responders later described as entirely preventable. Eric Latham, 32, worked as a senior accountant at a mid-sized firm and was known for turning even minor tasks into performance challenges. He kept color-coded spreadsheets at work and applied the same precision at home, arranging decorations and gifts with measured symmetry. His younger brother, Josh, 28, worked overnight shifts at a local warehouse and was more impulsive, especially after drinking. Family members later noted that small rivalries between the two often escalated when Eric framed activities as competitions. In the weeks leading up to Christmas, Eric became interested in online videos showing speed gift wrapping challenges. He purchased a heavy-duty electric rotary paper cutter designed for commercial print shops, capable of slicing through stacked materials using a continuously spinning internal blade. The machine carried multiple warnings about loose clothing, guarding, and proper mounting. It was never intended for residential use. On Christmas morning, after drinking leftover alcohol from the night before, the brothers cleared furniture from the living room and set up a makeshift wrapping station. Eric placed the cutter on a low coffee table that flexed under weight, creating an unstable surface. As the motor ran, Josh used his phone to record, encouraging Eric to work faster. The focus shifted from wrapping gifts to finishing first. As Eric wrapped presents, Josh struggled to keep pace with scissors alone. He leaned across the table to grab ribbon while wearing a loose flannel shirt. His sleeve brushed the narrow feed slot of the cutter. The rotating blade caught the fabric and pulled his arm forward before he could react. The injury was immediate and severe. The blade shredded tissue along the lower forearm and toward the elbow, damaging both major arteries and surrounding muscle. Heavy bleeding began within seconds. Eric shut off the machine only after the entanglement released. Josh collapsed backward as blood spread across the floor. Eric called emergency services and attempted to apply pressure using towels, but the bleeding could not be controlled. Josh remained conscious briefly before showing signs of shock. Paramedics arrived to find him pale, disoriented, and hypotensive. A tourniquet was applied, and aggressive resuscitation began during transport. Despite rapid hospital intervention, surgeons were unable to repair the extensive vascular damage. Josh Latham was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death as exsanguination due to a traumatic cutting injury involving industrial equipment. The report noted improper use, lack of guarding, alcohol involvement, and an unstable setup as contributing factors. Investigators classified the death as accidental. Family members later described it as the result of bravado, distraction, and ignoring obvious safety warnings, turning a routine holiday task into a fatal competition. It was December 25th, 2017, in a single-story ranch home on the outskirts of Greenville, South Carolina. Overnight rain had left the yard muddy and the air cold and damp, prompting many residents to stay indoors. Inside the house, preparations for Christmas dinner were already behind schedule. Mark Holloway, 49, worked as a regional sales manager and was hosting family for the holiday. He had volunteered to handle the turkey after watching online videos claiming deep frying produced faster, juicier results than a traditional oven. Despite printed warnings on the fryer's packaging and widely circulated seasonal safety advisories, Holloway chose to set up the fryer inside his attached garage to avoid the cold and wet conditions outside. Family members later told investigators that at least one relative objected to using the fryer indoors and suggested waiting for clearer weather or using the oven instead. Holloway dismissed the concern, prioritizing speed and convenience. The propane-powered fryer was positioned on the concrete floor near the open garage door. Cardboard boxes, gift bags, and a folded artificial tree were stored along the walls. The turkey, still partially frozen, had been removed from the refrigerator minutes earlier. Family members later stated Holloway believed the oil would burn off any remaining ice quickly. As the oil heated, steam and popping sounds were visible from the pot. Holloway lowered the turkey into the fryer using a metal hook. When the frozen interior made contact with the oil, it caused an immediate and violent boil-over. Superheated oil surged over the rim, splashing onto the burner and surrounding concrete. The propane flame ignited the oil instantly. A fireball expanded upward, catching nearby cardboard and plastic decorations. Witnesses inside the house heard a loud whooshing sound, followed by smoke alarms. Holloway attempted to pull the fryer backward, but slipping oil beneath his feet caused him to fall. Burning oil splashed across his clothing and torso. Flames spread rapidly through the garage, producing thick, black smoke. Family members were unable to reach him due to heat and smoke conditions and evacuated the house. Fire crews arrived within minutes to find the garage fully involved. The fire was contained before spreading to the main living area. Holloway was found near the fryer with extensive burn injuries. He was transported to a regional burn center in critical condition. Despite aggressive treatment, Holloway died later that evening from complications related to thermal injuries and smoke inhalation. The medical examiner listed the cause of death as severe burns with inhalation injury. Toxicology was negative for alcohol. Fire investigators documented grease patterns radiating from the fryer, scorch marks on the garage ceiling, and a partially submerged frozen turkey carcass in the pot. Packaging for the fryer was recovered from the trash, displaying clear warnings against indoor use and against frying frozen poultry. The incident was ruled accidental. Investigators cited multiple contributing factors, including indoor operation of a propane fryer, introducing a frozen turkey into hot oil, and attempting to move the fryer during ignition. What was meant to save time and avoid the cold turned a common holiday shortcut into a fatal decision. The fire department later used the case in seasonal safety briefings, emphasizing that deep frying turkeys indoors, especially while frozen, remains one of the most dangerous and avoidable mistakes people make on Christmas. It was December 25, 2018, in East Los Angeles, California, when a rushed Christmas morning decorating plan ended in a fatal mistake. Clear skies pushed the temperature to an unseasonably warm 72 degrees Fahrenheit, but the fir tree brought into the house had been stored outdoors overnight and was still wet with dew. Iris Thompson, 19, was a community college student who had taken charge of decorating her grandmother's living room for the holiday. Family members later told investigators she wanted the entire lighting setup finished before anyone else woke so she could reveal it herself. To save time, she declined help and ignored suggestions to wait until the tree dried. The 12-foot fir was dragged directly inside and placed in its stand. Water dripped from the lower branches onto the hardwood floor. Rather than towel the tree dry or wait several hours as recommended on the light packaging, Thompson began decorating immediately. She connected multiple strings of indoor Christmas lights together using several extension cords daisy-chained from a wall outlet. One cord had been taken from the garage. Investigators later documented visible abrasion and chew marks along the insulation, damage consistent with rodent activity. The cord was two-pronged, ungrounded, and not rated for damp conditions. The living room outlet was not GFCI protected. Despite the damaged cord and the visibly wet tree, Thompson continued working. Post-incident inspection showed the insulation damage was obvious and pre-existing, not the result of the fault. The cord's condition would have been apparent to anyone handling it. She wrapped lights around the lower branches first, repeatedly handling wet needles while adjusting cords running along the floor. As she crouched near the base of the tree, moisture accumulated beneath her hands and shoes. According to the post-incident inspection, Thompson was gripping a section of the damaged extension cord while steadying herself against the tree. At that moment, the compromised insulation exposed the energized conductor. An electrical fault occurred. Moisture on the tree and floor provided a conductive path through her body. Later, family members reported being awakened by a brief electrical buzzing sound, followed by the loss of power on the living room circuit. When relatives entered the living room seconds later, they found Thompson collapsed beside the tree. The damaged cord lay across her hand. Water was pooled around the tree stand and beneath the extension cords. Paramedics arrived quickly, but found her pulseless. Resuscitation efforts were unsuccessful, and she was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be electrocution, resulting in ventricular fibrillation. Contact burns were documented on her hand, consistent with sustained contact with an energized conductor. rather than a brief shock. An electrical inspection identified arcing and thermal damage at the exposed section of the cord and a tripped breaker on the circuit. Investigators cited multiple contributing factors: decorating a wet tree, using damaged indoor extension cords, daisy chaining multiple cords, lack of GFCI protection, and rushing the setup despite visible hazards. The death was ruled accidental. Investigators noted the incident was entirely preventable and resulted from ignoring basic electrical safety practices in favor of speed and presentation. What was intended to be a dramatic Christmas reveal became a fatal shortcut. Fire officials later emphasized the case in seasonal safety briefings as an example of how impatience, visible warnings ignored, and electricity mixed with moisture can turn a routine holiday task into one of the most avoidable ways to die on Christmas morning. It was December 25, 2015, in upstate New York, when a Christmas morning snowbuilding stunt ended in a fatal collapse. Overnight temperatures near 28 degrees Fahrenheit and roughly 8 inches of fresh, wet snow created dense, heavy packing conditions, ideal for shaping, but dangerous when hollowed. Lionel Finch, 18, had spent the early morning outside building an oversized snow structure in the front yard. Friends later told investigators he wanted something large and attention-grabbing for photos and planned to show it off later that day. Rather than making a solid snowman, Finch decided to build it hollow so someone could climb inside. The idea came from online videos showing people sitting inside snow sculptures. Finch copied the look without using the techniques shown to keep those structures stable. He worked alone and rushed the build, aiming to finish before others came outside. Finch rolled large base and middle sections and stacked them into a structure that stood close to 8 feet tall. To create the hollow interior, he packed snow around a plastic storage bin and lightweight forms, then pulled them out, leaving a thin shell. Investigators later documented uneven wall thickness, with some sections measuring well under a foot. Instead of reinforcing the base or thickening the walls, Finch widened the interior to make it easier to enter. The opening measured roughly 2 feet across, forcing anyone inside into a crouched position. Finch used a small shovel to scrape and smooth the lower interior walls, removing more material near the base, while the heavy upper sections remained stacked above. Excavation marks showed he entered the structure multiple times to adjust the space. Rather than stopping to rebuild or add support, Finch crawled inside to test it. Investigators later noted this was a critical mistake. Entering a hollow snow structure during active excavation places body weight beneath the weakest point, while hundreds of pounds of compacted snow remain overhead. Wet, near-freezing snow can shear and collapse without warning once support is removed. The collapse occurred while Finch was inside. The middle and upper sections sloughed inward, and several hundred pounds of dense snow dropped into the cavity, with little room to move and no secondary exit. Finch was buried in a crouched position. Family members later noticed the partially collapsed structure and could not find him. Digging began immediately, and Finch was uncovered unresponsive beneath tightly packed snow. Emergency responders arrived within minutes, but resuscitation efforts were unsuccessful. The medical examiner determined the cause of death was positional asphyxia and suffocation due to entrapment under compacted snow. There were no significant blunt injuries. Toxicology was unremarkable. The manner of death was ruled accidental. Scene documentation showed a collapsed shell, the plastic form near the opening, a shovel at the entrance, and interior scrape patterns consistent with progressive weakening. Investigators concluded the collapse was caused by hollowing the base, uneven wall thickness, repeated interior excavation, and entering the structure during construction. Authorities later emphasized that hollow snow structures are inherently unstable and should never be entered, especially while being built. The incident illustrated how copying a risky idea for attention without understanding basic structural limits turned a backyard stunt into one of the most avoidable ways to die on Christmas morning. It was December 25, 2019, in a 2-story split-level home on Elm Street in Naperville, Illinois. Outside, the temperature hovered at 22 degrees Fahrenheit, with a light dusting of snow on the sidewalks. Inside, the Harper family gathered in the dining room after their annual Christmas dinner. Conversation overlapped with laughter as dishes were cleared away. Above the table, a ceiling fan rotated at a low speed, circulating warm air from the kitchen. Kenneth Harper, 52, worked as a maintenance supervisor at an industrial facility in Aurora, Illinois. Co-workers described him as mechanically capable but informal about safety practices. Widowed in 2016, he lived alone during the work week and spent weekends with his daughter, Faith, and her family. At gatherings, he was observed drinking alcohol, telling long stories, and climbing on furniture despite objections. Dinner had recently ended when Ken's teenage nephew, Jake, joked about hanging mistletoe from the ceiling fan without turning it off. Several family members laughed. Ken, who had consumed multiple alcoholic drinks over the evening, moved a wooden dining chair beneath the fan. His speech was slightly slurred and his movements unsteady. Faith objected and told him to stop. Ken ignored her and stepped onto the chair. The chair was not designed for standing and rested unevenly on the hardwood floor. Ken was wearing a loose Santa hat with a long frayed tassel that hung down his back as he reached toward the fan's motor housing. As he extended his arms overhead, the tassel brushed one of the rotating fan blades. The contact was momentary and did not slow or stop the fan. Ken reacted suddenly, pulling his upper body backward. His weight shifted beyond the chair's center of balance. The chair tipped. Ken lost his footing and began to fall. As his body dropped, his shoulder and upper back struck the fan's central housing, snapping his head sharply backward. He then fell headfirst onto the hardwood floor beneath the fan, violently hyperextending his neck. The fall occurred at approximately 8:47 p.m. Blood pooled beneath his head as family members rushed toward him. The ceiling fan continued rotating briefly until Faith shut it off at the wall switch. Part of the Santa hat remained draped loosely over the housing. Faith called 911 at 8:48 p.m. while other family members attempted first aid. Ken was unresponsive and breathing irregularly. According to later statements, his breathing stopped entirely within moments. Naperville Fire Department paramedics arrived at 8:56 p.m. They found Ken in cardiac arrest with severe cervical trauma and pronounced him dead at the scene following consultation with medical control. Investigators concluded the ceiling fan did not restrain or pull Ken. The fall was caused by overreaching while standing on an unstable chair, combined with impaired balance. The brief contact with the fan blade was classified as a startle factor only. The coroner's report listed the cause of death as catastrophic cervical spine injury due to blunt force trauma from a fall, including a high cervical fracture. Toxicology testing showed a blood alcohol concentration of 0.12%, cited as a contributing factor. The death was ruled accidental, with investigators identifying alcohol impairment, standing on an unstable chair, and interacting with a moving ceiling fan as the primary contributors. It was December 25, 2017, when a Christmas morning surprise in rural Michigan turned deadly. Temperatures hovered near 35 degrees Fahrenheit, with light snow and a steady breeze cutting across open fields surrounding the home. Ronan Mercer, 55, a retired educator and grandfather, had arranged for 2 live reindeer from a licensed exhibitor to appear outside his house as part of a Santa-themed surprise for his grandchildren. The rental agreement included written safety instructions, later reviewed by investigators. Those instructions stated plainly that clients were not to enter the enclosure, touch the animals, or attempt to handle them for any reason. A trained handler was scheduled to arrive that morning. Family members told investigators Mercer chose to disregard those instructions. Wanting the reveal to feel authentic and personal, he decided to act as Santa himself and enter the enclosure before the handler arrived. This was not a misunderstanding. The rules were written, specific, and acknowledged as part of the rental arrangement. Mercer dressed in a full Santa costume, including a long fur-trimmed red coat and multiple sets of decorative bells. Despite the cold wind and the animal's unfamiliar environment, he entered the pen alone, carrying halters and additional bells intended for the reindeer. The plan, according to family statements, was to fit the halters himself and lead the reindeer past the living room windows. As Mercer stepped into the enclosure, wind snapped the loose fabric of his coat. The bells attached to his costume rang with each movement. One reindeer immediately showed signs of stress, ears pinned back, head lowered, and repeated sideways stepping. These behaviors, later confirmed by the exhibitor, were recognized warning signals. Mercer continued forward anyway, reaching toward the animal's head with a halter. The reindeer dropped its head and lunged. An antler tine struck Mercer in the chest, driving him backward into a fence panel. He lost balance as both animals surged through the confined space. Hoof impressions and blood patterns later documented indicated that Mercer was knocked down and trampled. Family members inside the house heard the disturbance and shouted while calling 911 and the exhibitor. Emergency responders waited until the exhibitor and animal control secured the enclosure. Mercer was found unresponsive with catastrophic chest injuries. He was transported to a regional trauma center where he was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The medical examiner documented multiple rib fractures, bilateral hemothorax, and lacerations to the liver and spleen. Injuries were consistent with a penetrating antler wound, followed by blunt force trauma from trampling. Toxicology was unremarkable. Scene photographs recorded torn Santa coat fibers on fence wire, displaced bells pressed into the mud, reindeer hair on a nearby panel, and dense hoof impressions near the impact point. Records from the exhibitor confirmed the reindeer, each weighing approximately 275 to 325 pounds, had no history of aggression when handled by trained staff, and reiterated that entering the enclosure without a handler was an explicit rule violation. Investigators concluded that Mercer's decision to ignore written instructions, enter the enclosure alone, and approach large animals while wearing a noisy costume in windy conditions directly provoked a defensive charge. The death was ruled accidental, caused by blunt and penetrating trauma inflicted by a large ungulate. What was meant to be a harmless holiday performance ended as a fatal result of clearly warned against, avoidable choices. Thanks for watching. Want to see more? Click on your screen now.